Good afternoon and welcome to another Marketing Experiments web clinic. The topic today is, can I test more than one variable at a time? Now this is just one question we're going to be looking at today. We have kind of a different setup in the studio today. Instead of just having one person in here kind of speaking to you, we've invited a few guests into the studio today to actually, we're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion around some of the most common testing related questions that we get on these webinars. So we get lots of questions from our audience related to how to run tests, what are the best tools to use, things like that. And what we're going to do today is we're going to try to cover as many of those questions in this kind of round table discussion setting. So hopefully you'll find that kind of unique. But before we get started, I have a few housekeeping things for you. If you can hear my voice, then you've logged into the call properly. You should also be able to see a slide on the screen right now that's got a big bird on it. This is basically our Twitter handle for this is our hashtag for the web clinic. If you want to interact with us, this is one way you can interact with us. We are monitoring Twitter right now. I can see the stream coming through as people are logging in and commenting. You can also use your question and answer feature provided by GoToWebinar. If for some reason you have any technical difficulties or you have questions related to the content, we have a whole team standing by to help you on GoToWebinar. So use that, take advantage of it. Also, we're going to be taking live questions during the entire presentation today. So if, as we're talking, more questions rise, you have clarifying questions, feel free to send them our way. We're going to try to, like I said, get to as many as possible. So we're going to be looking at some of the greatest challenges and questions that marketers have around testing today. And if you look at this benchmark data here, one of the greatest questions, one of the greatest challenges is testing. It's very difficult. There's lots of questions. Sometimes marketers feel intimidated by testing. There's probably likely marketers on this call right now who have never run a test, and they have many questions. Usually when you start off, you have lots and lots of questions. We want to help you today. Some people on the call maybe have been running tests for years, and you may have some more complicated questions. We're going to go there today as well. But there are a lot of questions around testing, and we're going to try to answer those for you today. At MECLABS, we've run a lot of tests, okay? If you're familiar with our web clinics, our web clinics are all about the most recent tests that we've had come through our labs. And so we're going to kind of step away from that normal format today where we bring you a discovery, and we're just going to be looking at, basically, based on our experience, based on the tests we've run, what have we learned from that? What are some of the maybe shortcuts? What are some of the tricks that we've learned in testing across 15,000 landing pages, across a billion emails? I mean, we do it day in and day out. The guys at the table that I have right here, they're running tests all day. They're reviewing tests all day. So who I have here on my far right is Mr. Bob Kemper. And Bob Kemper is the Senior Director of our Sciences group. Bob Kemper basically oversees really all of our testing and statistical analysis of our testing and the basically overviewing the data, making sure things are valid. He's probably the most seasoned person we have here at the table in terms of being able to answer your questions around validity, statistics, etc. To his right is Benjamin Filip, and he's a manager of our data sciences. And Ben has got more of kind of the ground level approach. He's in, day out, actually helping with the running of tests, reviewing data, putting together validity checks and all those kind of things. So he'll be hopefully providing some pretty ground level practical advice for you. So just feel free to send all ranges of questions at us today. To my left is Paul Cheney. We call him Cheney around here at the office, so you have my permission on the line right now to actually refer to him as Cheney. Here's the deal. Paul has this unique vantage point. He works with me on the content, and he's reviewing tests as they come through the lab, and he's interpreting tests as they come through the lab day in and day out. And so he's probably seen probably most of the tests that have come through the lab. He's analyzed them, he's looked at them, he's reviewed them, he's familiar with them. We'll be talking about variables and different values you can test. He's got a lot of insight there. So this is our panel we put together today. And like I said, we're going to be covering some of the most difficult questions, difficult and common questions we receive. Some of them will be easier than others. Some of them will be deeper than others. So like I said, some of you on the line are experts, and some of you this is brand new to you. So we're going to try to hit it all in one 35-minute session. So I've done my introductions. You guys ready?
We're ready. find out.
Okay, all right. So we're going to hit the first question right. We're going to go straight into questions. We're going to, like I said, we're going to try to get to as many as possible. All right, here's the first question. This comes to us all the time. Let me ask you this. I want to point this your way, Ben, okay? Question 1, can I test more than one variable at a time? Oftentimes on these clinics, we're showing tests, before and after pictures, where we're testing not just a headline, not just a call to action, but we're testing multiple things. Like on the screen that you can see right now. We ran this test, we got a before and after result of 58%. Or this test, 262%. So there's lots of tests that we're constantly showing, and one of the questions we get from the audience is, how can you run tests like that? Can you actually get learnings from tests where you're testing more than one variable, or am I limited to testing one variable at a time?
Well, Austin and the listeners, the good news is you're not just limited to one variable at a time. It depends on several different factors what you're going to run in a test. Before you begin a test, you should start looking at your business objectives. Your website's leaking revenue right now. So to run a campaign where you're going to do 6 months of testing single variables might not be the best initial strategy. You might want to go with a radical redesign, change a lot of different elements on the test at the same time. At this point, the pages would be the variables. You're comparing one page to the other page to see if it's better. Perfectly legal to do. Another key aspect of whether you're going to test one variable at a time or not is you're the tester. You get to pick the variable. You get to define what your variable interest is going to be. As long as it matches your research question, then you can test it. If my research question is which page, then I can test a page. If it's which headline, then I can only test the headline. That then becomes my variable.
So you're saying the variable can adjust based on the parameters that the researcher sets?
Absolutely, absolutely. Another key point to this is going from big to small. So like I said, you're going to go to that radical redesign first. You're going to change a bunch of different elements. You know that your page B has 1, let's say. The problem is you don't know what part caused it, right? You changed a bunch of different things. You know that the page is better, but what caused it? Was it your headline? Was it your body copy change? Was it your call to action per se? Once you've tested, you have your optimized page, then you can go and try to isolate which variables are causing. So you work your way from broad changes, broad variables, to single individual variables, to you get to the end, and what you have is testing headline versus headline or font versus font. You can get almost as nitpicky or as broad because you define the question.
Excellent. Excellent. So is there a reason why you don't start off on the other end in terms of starting with single variable tests? Why would you start off with a radical, variable cluster, radical redesign test?
I think you have the option to get the most knowledge from that. You know that certain elements have changed, and then you can refine your knowledge and then figure out what exactly was that caused the change. So if you don't know where to start big and work your way to small.
Okay. Can I just add one thing? You really don't, in most cases, need to know what kind of font. From what I've seen, as far as tests that have come through, small changes like font size or font color in a headline usually aren't going to make that big of a difference. So test, groups of variables or variable clusters until they don't make a difference to your bottom line or to your business objectives.
Right. Often there's going to be another variable that you need to isolate before you get down that far to font size.
And when you're testing, you generally begin with a diagnosis, something you feel is suboptimal about the page, or the email or whatever element of the funding you're testing, and from your diagnosis, you create a hypothesis, and then you design your test to test the hypothesis. And if you believe there is too much friction, there is anxiety caused by something, font sizes may contribute to one or more of those, but what we've discovered and what we teach in the testing certification course is that you should begin with the largest variable cluster, largest set of elements, largest variable cluster that your research question will permit. That gives you the opportunity to get a great lift. We're looking for lifts and what we refer to as learnings or discoveries.
So if your research question is something like, will reducing anxiety on a page increase conversion, something along those lines. You're saying that basically you can have multiple variables under, or you can classify that as one variable, or have multiple variables under the category or under the research question. Will a less anxiety reducing page produce increase conversion?
That's a great point, and and speaks to something that we've talked about internally very recently. How do you distinguish the difference between a variable and a variable cluster? If you say the headline is a variable, well, yes, I mean it's pretty specific, but are there multiple things that you could change about a headline? Yes, you could change the headline copy. You can change the font size, font color, the shape, the motion. There are lots of things about a headline that you could change, and consequently, it could be referred to as either a variable or a variable cluster. And how you decide which it is the designer, the person who designs the test, establishes based upon the objective whether the headline is a variable or a variable cluster.
Excellent, excellent. So part of what this is Austin speaking again. Part of what I want to do here is take the discussion and try to summarize it with some layman terms. These guys are very smart guys, and I'm not as much. So I want to try to bridge that gap, and so here's what I took away from it. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So what I need to understand is that we should design our tests so that they are useful, okay? It's not necessarily useful to test the font. It may be, but not necessarily. You should be striving to answer a useful question, create a useful design that's going to give you results, answer key questions related to your customer. A variable can be anything that the designer defines. Really, ultimately, it comes down to the designer. So really, there's debate about what is a variable in and of itself. So there's some flexibility there. And thirdly, you should probably start with radical variable clusters. This is what I get from you, Ben. You're moving from kind of radical variable clusters to more of a single, as narrow as you can, to try to really discern what maybe made the changes in those radical versions.
Yeah, you're moving towards more specific knowledge about one element.
Good.
And that helps you to move from which in your research question to why. There may be, you may change a number of things about elements on a page or an email that you believe may be contributing to anxiety. Your hypothesis is the difficulty is one of anxiety, and you see 3 or 4 different sources of anxiety. You might change them all at once in a variable cluster to test your hypothesis that there is, in fact, that anxiety is a factor. Then you may want to know why. Which of these things, or why do they have anxiety? Is it the wording of this warranty thing, or how this is asked, or is it something else? And you would drill down then. What was a variable?
Excellent.
What was a variable defined as a variable for that test will become a variable cluster when you move down to the next level to ask why is there anxiety introduced here.
All right, good guys. This is good. Let's move on to the next question, okay? Question number 2, and I'm going to point this your way, Bob. So we hear a lot about multivariate testing. So what is it, and is it valuable? When should you use it? That's the question. We get that asked a lot.
Multivariate testing. Multivariate testing is a category or a family of experimental research methodologies that's intended to allow you to test the impact of more than one independent variable at a time. I mean, when we're in science class in grade school or middle school, we are introduced to the concept of experimental methods with single-factor testing, and we're admonished. We're told only change one thing, and everything else has to stay the same. And with single-factor testing, that is a primary principle. You change one thing, everything else has to stay the same, and you measure the impact of the change in that one thing. What multivariate testing is a method for that uses large sample sizes and mathematical techniques to allow us to simultaneously change multiple independent variables and measure the impact of them independently. So we might change a headline and a marquee banner and an image and multiple things at once, and that would be with a single factor testing. That would be unwise. That would be a large variable cluster. But with multivariate testing techniques, if we had 3 different headlines and 4 different images, and that we were using multivariate techniques and tools, allow us to combine what would have to be separate A/B tests into one and gain insights.
So when would someone choose to, or when would it be valuable for someone to use a multivariate test? When is that valuable versus an A/B split test? I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying that an A/B split test, multivariate test is kind of a almost multiplied A/B split test, like a tool, an automatic way to run multiple A/B split tests at once really quickly. Yes. But let me ask you this, when is that even applicable? When do you need to do that? Why not just run an A/B test?
Well, the factors that determine what's most appropriate in a given circumstance or for a given company would be multivariate tests require larger sample sizes, typically, for a given test. Now, you can argue that the number of samples, the number of arrivals per insight, if you're testing multiple insights at once, you can use multivariate techniques to reduce the number of arrivals per insight when you're doing multiple ones, but the typical multivariate test is going to be of longer duration by the very nature of the fact that you are testing a lot of different treatments.
Requires a greater sample size.
So you need a bigger,
more traffic.
Right.
Okay.
Bigger sample size, more sophisticated tools. There are many single-factor A/B testing tools out there. There are fewer that are capable of doing multivariate techniques. And it requires some additional sophistication in testing. You need some more skills in order to interpret a multivariate test and to design. The design of a multivariate test is different in some ways from a single factor test.
And it's more complicated. Would you say this is more an advanced level testing? Would you would recommend someone when they're starting out to start with A/B and then move to multivariate, or?
Well, there are more sources of validity risk. And we'll talk a little bit more about validity, I know, a little bit later on. But for instance, one additional one that's introduced and is unique to multivariate testing is that of hidden variable interaction. So when you're testing multiple variables at once, if you were to test all the headlines that you're testing, and then once you're done with that, pick whichever one performed the best, and that's your new control, and now test all of the different images, then what might be hidden to you is interaction among the variables where the highest performing headline and the highest performing image, when they're combined, there might be a different one, there might be a different combination that just are so innately well matched, congruent with one another, that the top performing one of either of these two, when combined, a different set would have performed better. And multivariate testing gives you the opportunity to study interactions among variables, but it also comes with the responsibility to understand that there are only certain kinds of multivariate tests. We may get to fractional factorial methods, and some of those presume independence. And if you don't know that, then there's a risk that's not present with A/B testing.
Excellent, excellent. Let me see if I can summarize what I heard here. Okay, so first off, multivariate testing is really kind of and this is definitely layman's term, but it's a simple way basically to test multiple A/B tests at once. It's really to really get accomplished a lot more with a shorter period of time, quicker. In terms of whenever you're wanting to consider using it, when should someone use it? We're talking about when you have a large traffic amount. We're talking about when you have the capability to interpret complicated results. It's more complicated, so you have to have a certain degree of expertise in that. And also when you have time to run a longer test. That's what, excellent. This is good. I'm going to move on to the next question. Actually, it's funny, a question came in from Brandon, and Brandon, you asked, is there a way to, it says, can you address how low traffic sites may need to change their testing strategy? So we're going to talk just about that. Like how does, here's question 3, and Paul, I'm going to throw this your way. How does a website that has low traffic run tests?
Sure. So I've seen a lot of tests on low traffic sites. Essentially, there's going to be a trade-off if you have low traffic in either time, budget, or in certainty of your test results. So one of those is probably going to have to get sacrificed a little more so that you can have 2 of the others. In general, there are some creative ways to get around it. The first way would be to kind of test in your channel so that you have more samples to work with, and then...
So when you say channel, just explain to the audience what you mean by channel.
So a channel would be, for instance, you could, if you're driving PPC traffic, you're going to have more samples in the search engine of impressions to clicks than you would, say, from landing page hits to click through on the landing page. So you have more samples there in the PPC channel, in the email channel, in even direct mail. As long as the channel is representative of your ideal customer, you can usually get a make pretty good discoveries and inferences based on that, and then kind of export those discoveries into the rest of your site. Another way is to make your treatment designs more radical. So if there's a bigger difference in your treatments, you're going to validate quickly on the lower sample size.
So if the treatments are more different, you're more likely to validate sooner. Is that?
Well, if you made them different in the right way, then yeah, you are more likely to validate sooner. And this takes us back to the one variable where, you can change all those things, but you're going to lose clarity on what's causing the change, and then that's the trade-off. So.
And then kind of the final way would be to set your statistical level of confidence lower. So by and large, our kind of standard for general testing in the lab is 95% level of confidence. And that means, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that means you're right 19 out of 20 times? No? Incorrect?
It's slightly off.
Okay. Well, what is it?
What it means is that if we took the same exact experiment and we ran it 100 times, we would expect to be right 95 out of those 100 times.
Okay.
And we accept a 5% error as random chance that we could potentially not get the same result 5 out of those 100 times.
Okay, so you guys can definitely probably talk to this better than I can. I'm not good with the numbers, but as far as I know, there's a level of confidence that you can have that your test results are statistically significant, that one treatment is different than the other treatment. And you can kind of set that bar a little lower than kind of the maybe industry standard, just so you can, but again, that's a trade-off in certainty. So.
Well, that's the difference between an academic setting and a business setting. Right. In academia, there are standards for publication, and that everyone has agreed to.
In reality, what is the big difference between a 90% and a 95%? I mean, does it make a big difference in the business setting?
I think you can think of it almost like, what are you willing to bet on, right? Are you willing to take the chance that 10 times out of 100 you were actually wrong? Are you willing to take 5 at a time? I've seen people that refuse to run anything less than 99%. I've seen people who are willing to take 80%, 85%. So it's really up to you and how you define your success and what you're willing to do.
Well, and that's what we're paid for. We as professionals, certainly as managers and decision makers, we're paid to make decisions in the presence of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And if we're faced with spending more, taking 2 more weeks to let the test run, or taking the level of certainty that we have today and saying, well, that's, I'm willing to go with that. That's a matter of discretion. That, again, academia, you don't have the option. If you want to be published and believed, then this is what you need to do. In business, that's what we do.
And I think it comes back to this. Like, so the question is, how do you test within low traffic? And so you may be able to run a test where you can only get 90% statistical confidence, and that's potentially a trade-off that you have to face as a business. And so let me see if I can summarize this point. The answer is, to what Paul was saying is, either way, testing with low traffic is likely going to face you're going to face some sort of trade-off. You're going to trade off between the time it takes, the budget, or the certainty. And so you may have to drop that level of confidence down. You may have to create more radical designs and kind of lose potentially, the information you get about the customers. You may have to sacrifice that a little bit. But there's some ways, also creative ways you can overcome it. You can test in the channel. You can, like we said, lower your desired confidence level, or you can design radical treatments. So that's what I got from this. You guys ready for the next question? All right, here we go. Ooh, we get this one a lot. So let me ask this one to Ben. Ben, how do you determine what to test? All right, there's probably millions of combinations, millions of different things you can test on a web page. How do you determine what to test?
Well, my background's in statistics, so of course I'm going to go and say that it's all about the data, right? You got to look at your data, you got to see what's happening. But in reality, there's other factors that come into play. And I've created a couple of graphics for this talk only, specifically for you guys out there. These have never been seen by anyone before. It's kind of an inside joke. We use these in-house all the time. They actually help inform our decisions.
Ignore them.
Yeah. But there's an order to the madness, kind of, ready? So we want to optimize the product offer first. We want to make sure that what we're offering the customer is not only what they need and what they want, but also that we're being exclusive in some way about our product offer. You want to then look at the presentation and then eventually the channel. So you're kind of working from the specific product and you're moving through. So you can kind of tell your deficiencies by looking at your data and figure out which one of these 3 things needs to be optimized first for your personal website. The second thing is you need to have a philosophy of how you're going to change things. Once you find where to test, how are you going to change those? We at MECLABS obviously have a conversion heuristic. We use it every day, and it helps define what we're going to change and how we're going to affect things. So once we find that deficiency in the data, then we can say, what is it about this page that's actually causing it? Is it the friction? Is it the clarity of our value proposition? Is that what's causing the deficiency? So you have a philosophy, and then you can affect the change and decide what to change based on that philosophy. We have a case study here that we're going to go over, and this is a website that sells retail and wholesale goods. I think they're actually collectibles. We started with the partnership. We needed to do a funnel metrics analysis to determine where it was that we needed to test, and we actually did that, and we saw a 20% decrease in the second step of the funnel, which I think we have right here. Yeah, 20% decrease at the one of the checkout pages in the funnel. So we found out where the decrease was happening, where the leakage was occurring. Then we realized, okay, what is causing that? So we had to actually look at the web page, which I think we have available. Here was the web page.
So this is the original page.
This is the original page that they had, right? So we noticed that it's unclear why the credit card is required at this point. The purchase agreement terms caused confusion. They were hard to read, hard to understand. So we knew at that point we were dealing with the heuristic element of anxiety. Once we knew it was anxiety, we could take steps to relieve the anxiety. The second, here's the eventual treatment. We added some third-party security indicators, which helped to relieve the anxiety, like I said, and we also gave them the satisfaction guarantee. Now they know they can trust us, that their credit card information isn't just going to somebody who's going to misuse it, misrepresent it. And this test actually got a lift. The control was a conversion rate of 82.3%, and the treatment had 86.04. So it was already very high. One thing people don't realize is there's a limit to this, right? 100% click-through rate is as high as you can go. So when you're already at 82%, you're pretty much limited. You can't get huge lifts on top of that, right? I could never get a 50% lift here. But we got a 4.51% relative lift. It was at our level of confidence. And so we declared our treatment the winning treatment for this test. The thing to understand here is that it was a small lift, Austin, right? 4.51 doesn't make a lot of headlines with 4.51. Right. But because of because we saw the leakage, because of using our philosophy, it actually was a revenue generator of about $500,000 or so for this website over the next year.
Excellent, excellent. So to summarize, knowing where to test requires knowing your data, kind of finding those leaks, finding the key strategic places. Generally, you can use the OPR greater than OPRN greater than OC. Optimize the product first, presentation first, then the channels. It's kind of generally the process you want to go. In terms of what to test, when you've discovered, okay, there's a leak here, or there's a problem here, what to test, you can use the conversion heuristic that we teach on all the time. So, and that's basically what that's there to serve, is to help marketers understand, from what I understand, what to test.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and it's all weighted. You can look at a page through that lens and actually discover what to test. I'm going to keep burning through because we are running low on time. I want to get to another question because actually I'd like to get to 2 more questions if possible because I see them coming in. This is a question that's related to Alan, your question about how do you calculate the test significance to determine if there's a difference. So that's basically question number 5 we have here. And this is a question we get asked a lot. And I'm going to send this, Bob, your way. How do you know when a test is valid? And just so you know, if you can, give it as quick as you possibly. Yeah. Go ahead. Go for it.
You know my tendency.
Yeah.
Validity in a testing concept perspective is it's a multi-dimensional thing. A valid test, in broad terms, is one that is designed and conducted free of validity threats. Right. So what's a validity threat? Most people, when they ask that question, are talking about one type of validity threat, and they're talking about sample distortion, what we refer to as sample distortion effect, and that means
that's what Alan's talking about.
Yes. Yeah. Did I get enough? Did I get enough arrivals? Have I got enough data that I have a valid test? And that's essential. You need enough samples with a big enough difference and all the things that go into the statistical portion of having a valid test. Did I get a big enough game to get the level of confidence that I decided up front that I needed in order to make a decision? But I would say equally large and probably greater threats, if only because of lack of awareness. There are other threats that we have discovered are even more dangerous. One is selection effect, and that is when who gets which treatment is something other than random. And that's one form of selection or sampling bias. Sampling biases are a serious validity threat, and particularly if you're unaware of them. You make decisions based on data that is not representative. Another one is history effect. History effect is the impact on an independent variable, something you want to improve, like conversion rate, that's caused by something having to do with the passage of time. So if you are for a case study that we've used in our online testing course, we were testing in the channel, testing PPC ads, and it was for the National Alert Registry. And it's a registry of sexual offenders that across the United States. And during the middle of our test, it's a 14-day test, I believe, and right in the middle of the test there was a nationally televised program and we're testing language. You know, is registered offender, a child predator, and there were a number of them, and that nationally televised program, it was may have been Oprah, or was, used one of those terms almost exclusively, and of course we saw a dramatic impact in tracing back. We saw a dramatic impact where that term suddenly was clicked on more and a much higher search rate, and invalidated that test.
Let me. This is good. There's a question that just came in from Alan again. Alan, thanks for sending your questions. These are really good questions you're asking. I'm going to throw this your way, okay? I'm going to start taking, in fact, audience members, I'm just going to say we're going to shift now. We'll give you the opportunity to ask some questions. So if you have some questions that are kind of in your mind right now, we're about to be done, but want to give you an opportunity to ask your questions. From Alan, here's his question. He says this: how did you know that a 4.6% increase was not just some random fluctuation from the same population? How did you know that?
Well, we have statistical methods that we use to calculate whether or not the randomness is what's causing the change, right? Something like the t-test, one of my favorite stories in statistics was there's a guy who in 1908 was working for the Guinness Brewing Company, right? And when he needed to make quality assurance samples, he couldn't obviously use 4 kegs worth of Guinness because you're cutting into your bottom line at that point. So he invented what we now use as the student's t-distribution. And we know it works because who's ever had a bad Guinness?
So there's the connection right there between beer and statistics, right? Is that how they?
That's it, yeah. Before I do anything, I have a sip of coffee. No, but once you get into the statistics, you can start to learn all these distributions, and we compare what we got versus what the control got, and we actually see what is the probability that I get a number this much higher, in this case 4.6% higher relatively. What are the chances that I get that just by random chance? And we had less than 5% chance of that happening, so we accept that.
And by the way, I think we're going to be tweeting out a sample size calculator and also a blog post by Dan Burstein that's going to help you to calculate that up front. So
if you're monitoring this on Twitter, you may already have seen that link. It's coming through if it hasn't come through already. And that should hopefully even, I mean, if you're really wanting to get into this and start calculating validity, you can actually start playing with that tool and actually running your own tests and doing that. So excellent. So that's a good question. Here's another question from Cayman. And I think we can take maybe 2 more questions. We're gonna, if you guys will allow us, we'll go a little bit over here and get to some of your questions. Here's Cayman's question. How long do you wait before you stop a test? So when should you stop a test? Anybody?
I think that's actually the next question.
Yeah, I think actually that was the next question.
Excellent.
You know, there's 2 things that really go into when to stop a test. It's, do you have a sufficient sample, and have you reached a level of confidence? You can stop when either the sufficient sample reaches sufficient and you haven't reached a level of confidence. You can still stop a test then. The chances that you continue to 95% level of confidence after sufficient sample has been reached get progressively smaller. I like to use the example, if you had $1,000 and I gave you $10, then that $10 means something to you. But if you had 100,000 and I gave you $10, then the $10 doesn't mean as much. So the bigger your sample size already is, the less impact each person will have.
At what point should you stop running a test? Maybe another way to say it. Like, at what point is it actually undermining your test results to keep it running?
Well, that's a great question. It has to do with that history effect.
Mm-hmm.
The longer a test runs, the more potential there is that something's going to happen that'll change the results. Now it's innate that you're presuming when you test that the conditions during the test will be representative for some important length of time, and that the test is predictive of what you will see when the test is over. So there's an innate presumption there, but when there are certain kinds of history-oriented, time-oriented things that happen predictably, and if your test runs too long, things like seasonality. If you test across the beginning of the Christmas season, or tax season if you do tax software, if you're testing and you run such a long test that things change.
Yes.
Things you know ahead of time are predictably changing, then you impact the
What would you
validity.
say is the standard? Is there a standard length for test duration? Is there like a best practice for
I think
testing?
the next slide is a graph that shows kind of the
Yeah, go
a simplified version of.
I don't know if that answers the most specific question you just asked now, but this is definitely a useful visual for those of you who want to know when to stop a test. I believe your question was.
Is there a standard? And I should know, like, is there a set standard? Is it like, I mean, a week? Is it a month? How long do you?
You know, it's so dependent on how many people come to your website. Okay. If you have 1 million people come to your website a day, you might be able to shut it off a lot quicker than if you have 500.
5 second test.
Right, 5 seconds. That's the minimum standard for testing. But it depends on your seasonality too. If you see high fluctuations on the weekends, you might want to give yourself 2 weeks so you can account for all those kinds of things.
And that's brings up a great related question, and exactly that is how soon can I stop a test? And there are dangers in running a test if you are if you're Google or if you're Dell or if you're if you've got an extraordinarily high, 2 million hits a day, or then conceivably, statistically, here's where testing responsibility and seasoning comes in. You could conceivably, after 4 minutes, all right, I've got it. I have enough traffic. The question then is, did that 4-minute period completely represent the type of traffic, the motivation, the people who are going to see the site for the next year?
And that's the sampling distortion effect you were talking about earlier. You want to make sure you get, like you said exactly, the representative sample of people.
So guys, I am getting flags. I've let us go over a little bit, and hopefully the audience, hope you guys found that valuable. I wanted to let these guys answer some of these questions. I saw some of the questions coming through. I wanted to get through to them, to you. We are out of time. This has been really good. I see a question right now from Victoria that is one of the most common questions we get. She's asking what software. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, guys. And if you need to jump off the line, go ahead and jump off the line. But we get this question so often. I don't want to leave this conversation. I don't want to leave this table without addressing it. So here's the question: what software are you recommending to use for testing? And anyone can answer this. I think. Yep.
I think we had it prepared too, right?
This was a question we were looking at doing.
Right. So I'll go ahead and take it. So I've seen a lot of our tests come through the lab, and I've seen the various testing tools that we've used, and even over the past 2 years that I've really been getting into these tests, they've changed significantly. A better question is then kind of what's the best software to use is what is the best software for my business, for my operation, because even if there was the best software out there in general, it may still not be the best software for you. So a couple things to consider. Really, you're just making a business decision. So you're going to just consider your budget. You're going to consider your in-house expertise. If you don't have a lot of expertise and don't have a lot of budget, you're going to want an easy-to-use tool that maybe doesn't cost a lot or is free. There's trade-offs all down the line. In general, the industrial strength testing tools are going to let you run a valid test in most cases. And there's really not one over the other. There's just going to be some trade-offs that you're going to have to consider. And also, in our lab, I've seen us run simultaneous testing tools in the same test, just because maybe we wanted features from one. But we wanted the best of both worlds, so you can actually stack testing tools sometimes. You're increasing, some threats there, and I've seen that happen as well. So.
And if a testing tool doesn't do the basic operations that we all need it to do, then it's not going to survive in this world. People are going to go through it. Bob Kemper is going to download it and try it out and know that it's not the best one to use. So you don't have to worry about getting the basics covered when you're doing this. It's exactly like Paul said. It's, what are you giving up, and how much money do you have to spend, and what's your expertise? Do you need a strong support system to answer all your questions, or do you think you know how to do it? All those kind of things are what make a testing tool best for you.
Yep, this is good. Well, guys, I'm going to wrap up the conversation here at this point. This has been good. I just want to let the audience know we're trying something new here. We wanted to give you access to some of the experts we have here in the lab. Let us know if you found it valuable, if you like this kind of format, if you would like us to do this more often around different topics where you can actually submit questions and have them basically addressed here in a conversational manner. One thing I've been asked to tell you about, which I think is actually really relevant to the conversation, is we just launched an online testing course. Over the next week, you can actually, just for this audience, for this web clinic audience, you can get $100 off of that course. So if you want to go deeper into statistical validity, if you want to learn kind of how to track history effect, instrumentation effect, all the different validity threats, you can take that course. You'll get to see Bob Kemper, teaching part of that course. So. Anyway, that's all we have for you today. Again, let us know what you thought of this clinic. I thank you guys for being here, taking time out of your day. I'm sure we're going to send you right back into the lab to start running some tests.
Thanks for having us.
And so it's been a joy, and thank you for attending. If you liked what you heard today, please share it with a friend. Thank you.